Now, regarding setup, you want to make sure that the tom-tom is placed at a nice angle from the snare drum so you can get at the drum and make sure that you can hit and strike all of the drum. If you have this at too fierce an angle, where it's just like that, you're never going to be able to get at the drum in this way. We want to make it where we can pivot from the snare drum to the tom-tom. I like to say that we're setting the table, and everything is really within reach. We have a nice pivot from the snare drum to the floor tom. Oftentimes I see with young players the floor tom ends up being, kind of way over here. And that means that their technique is going to have to adjust for the placement of the drum. It's not really a good way to go. So have the floor tom tucked in comfortably where you can pivot, where you can come off the ride cymbal. The snare drum, oftentimes we see the snare drum placed too low. And in that case, I see young drummers banging into their leg when they're trying to get rim shots. So have the snare drum at a comfortable angle where your arms are nice and relaxed, kind of at 45 degrees. You can strike the drum, you can get rim shots, brush playing is easy. And then we have the nice pivot from snare drum to tom, snare drum to floor tom, cymbal to snare drum. My cymbal placement, I have it where I'm going to shake hands with somebody, put the stick in, there's my cymbal. Now cymbal placement, as I travel around the world, it's all over the place because drums are very personal. But if you have the cymbal too low, it affects the setup, because if I were to put this down here, then I might have to move the floor tom and I might have to move the mounted tom. So it's a nice idea to put it kind of out here in this area where your hand can get to it like this. If it's too low, you might have some problems. If it's too high, then you're going to, again, adjust your technique to your setup, and that's going to maybe create some long-term problems. Sometimes it's nice to have crash cymbals up here because it looks great, but again, in the long term, it's a much better idea to have the cymbals in where you can hit them. If I have another crash, I'd probably have it right here. I don't want to be reaching that far for anything. So set the table, have everything where you can get to it easily with a pivot. That leads me to the hi-hat. For some reason, the hi-hat seems to be put over here oftentimes, maybe because that's kind of comfortable for the legs to be in that position, and this happens mostly with young players, but you can see how that really doesn't make much sense. So we want to get the hi-hat in close, again, so there's this pivot from the snare drum to the hi-hat, and we can really get this kind of motion going. And everything is just nice and relaxed, tucked in, and your legs they create a nice V shape. Any great performance can be compromised by creeping hi-hat or creeping bass drum. So make sure that whenever you're performing or playing the drum set, that you have, first of all, a nice carpet that won't slide. It has to have some kind of rubber backing on it. Just a carpet remnant won't necessarily do the trick if it slides on a gym floor. So make sure that it's a nice solid carpet that's big enough to capture the whole drum kit. But in addition to that, we have to take a look at these stands and make sure that we're utilizing all the elements that are on the hardware of today. We have a combination of rubber and spikes that can be used with the feet. A lot of times this piece of equipment takes a beating and the rubber wears away, or the spikes come off, and then we have the creeping hi-hat. It happens all the time. So utilize the rubber feet, make sure you have good rubber feet. Utilize the spikes. Don't put the spikes directly into a wood floor. Also make sure that the spikes don't go right through your carpet. So you got to be a little careful with the use of spikes, but just make sure that this is not going anywhere. Same thing is true on the bass drum. Most bass drums today have nice rubber feet with a little spike coming out at the end. But I've seen many kits that are have seen better days, and the spurs don't even come down to the floor. So the drummer constantly is pulling back the bass drum all the time. So make sure those spurs come down, the feet stick. If that still doesn't do it, then you're going to have to come up with something else. I've seen drummers hook a rope to the spurs and curl it back behind the throne. That works. It's a little ancient looking, but it does work. I've also seen some drummers put weights, put a small weight in front of the bass drum so it won't creak. But if you need big heavy weights in front of your bass drum, perhaps you're playing a little too hard. Usually the feet will do the job in conjunction with a nice solid carpet. So let's not have any creeping bass drums or hi-hats. I want to talk about the bass drum now. If you have your throne too far back, then your foot is going to kind of be extended like this, and you're not going to get the control and the power that you're going to want to develop. The angle of your foot is really important in this whole scheme of things. So I guess it really starts with your throne height. Your throne height needs to be where your leg is at a right angle. If you're too high, if you were to just stand up, you can see that your leg is tense right now because you're putting pressure on it. If you're too high, that creates that kind of pressure. If you're too low, it puts you under the drums too much. So we really want to try to create just a nice, natural, seated position where our leg is at a right angle. We're not too far into the drum like this, because now our ankle isn't going to operate effectively, because we've created a kind of a weird one down here. So you want to back up and just get it where you have a nice free-flowing technique with your bass drum foot. So start with the throne, position the bass drum, position the hi-hat, set the drums up, set the table so you can reach everything, then you're ready to start.